The rain had been falling for 3 days when they finally let me out of my room. I stood at the threshold, my bare feet cold against the polished stone floor, listening to the cascade drumming against the tower windows. The sound had become a companion in my isolation. Constant, relentless, washing away the world outside while I remained locked within these walls. They said it was for my protection. They said I needed time to grieve, to heal from the shock of Father's death. But grief, I had learned, tastes different when it's forced upon you in silence. My fingers traced the doorframe, feeling the grain of ancient wood beneath my palm. How many times had I touched this same spot over the past 6 months? How many times had I pressed my ear against it, hoping to hear something, anything, that would tell me I hadn't been forgotten entirely? The hallway stretched before me, dim and empty. Torches flickered in iron sconces, their light dancing across tapestries depicting wolves mid-hunt, their eyes gleaming with painted ferocity. I had memorized every thread of those tapestries during my brief walks to the washroom, my only permitted excursions. The servants who brought my meals never met my eyes. The guards who stood outside my door never spoke. And Lady Miriam, my appointed keeper, offered only tight-lipped instructions about propriety and patience. "You must understand, Celeste," she had said just yesterday, her hands folded primly in her lap, as she sat across from me in the small sitting room that had become my entire world. "Your father's death was complicated. There are matters that must be settled before you can resume your place in society. Complicated." The word had echoed in my mind long after she left. Father had been the beta of the Shadowmere pack, second only to the Alpha King himself. His death should have been mourned publicly, honored with ceremony. Instead, they had buried him quickly, quietly, and locked me away like a secret too dangerous to share. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders, a simple gray wool that matched the dreary stones of my prison, and began walking. My pale blonde hair, unbound and unkempt, fell past my waist. I hadn't been allowed scissors, mirrors, or even proper brushes. Whatever vanity I'd once possessed had withered in this solitude. The corridor led to a spiral staircase that descended into the main wing of the castle. I had been forbidden from going farther. But today something felt different. The guards were absent. The usual sounds of the castle, distant conversations, footsteps, the clatter of daily life, were muted, as if the entire stronghold held its breath. My heart hammered as I took the first step down, then the second, the third. Each step was an act of rebellion, small but significant. My hands trembled against the cold stone wall, steadying myself as much from fear as from the months of confined weakness that had left my legs unsteady. When was the last time I had walked more than 20 paces? When was the last time I had seen the sky? The staircase opened into a grand hall I barely recognized. My memories of this place were from childhood, running through these very corridors while Father conducted his duties, hiding behind pillars during formal gatherings, watching the warriors train in the courtyard beyond the tall windows. But that girl felt like someone else entirely. She had been loved, protected, seen. Now, I was a ghost. I moved along the perimeter of the hall, keeping to the shadows out of instinct. Voices drifted from a chamber ahead. The council room, if memory served. The doors stood slightly ajar, and against every whisper of caution in my mind, I crept closer. Cannot keep this hidden much longer. The voice was unfamiliar, male, tinged with frustration. The girl has been locked away for half a year. People are asking questions. Let them ask. This voice I knew, deep, commanding, edged with something that made my skin prickle with recognition and fear. Alpha King, Draven Ashford. I had seen him only once before Father died. A towering figure with dark hair and eyes like winter storms. He had looked at me then with an expression I couldn't name, something between pity and calculation. She stays where she is until I decide otherwise. My lord, with respect, she is still the beta's daughter. She has rights. She has what I grant her. The finality in his tone silenced whatever protest had been forming. Her father's actions forfeited any considerations of rights. She should be grateful I've allowed her to live in comfort rather than the sentence cut off abruptly, but the implication hung heavy in the air. My breath caught. Father's actions? What did that mean? The official word had been that he died in a hunting accident, a tragic misfortune that befell even the most experienced wolves. But the way Draven spoke, the execution was justified. Another voice interjected, cold and clinical. Treason carries only one sentence. But the girl is innocent in this. Surely, execution. Treason. The words slammed into me like physical blows. My vision swam, and I pressed my hand against the wall to keep from collapsing. The stone felt suddenly liquid beneath my palm, the world tilting sideways. Father hadn't died in an accident. He had been executed. For treason. And they had lied to me, locked me away and lied, innocent or not. She carries his blood. Draven's voice had dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. Blood that cannot be trusted. She remains confined until I determine what to do with her. And if the pack demands answers? If they demand to see her? A long pause. Then, they won't. I've made certain of that. The conversation shifted to other matters. Border disputes, supply lines, mundane governance that barely registered through the roaring in my ears. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. The walls seemed to close in, the hallway stretching impossibly long. Father. My kind, steady father, who had taught me to read the stars, who had braided my hair when I was small, who had promised I would always be safe, a traitor? No, it couldn't be true. But why would the Alpha King lie about the manner of death unless there was shame to hide, unless there was something worth concealing? I didn't remember making the decision to run. My body simply moved, instinct taking over where thought had shattered. My bare feet slapped against the cold stone as I raced back toward the staircase, desperate to reach my room before anyone discovered my absence, before anyone saw the tears streaming down my face. I nearly made it. You shouldn't be here. The voice stopped me mid-stride, authoritative but not unkind. I spun to find a man standing in the shadowed alcove near the stairs, tall, broad-shouldered, with auburn hair tied back, and eyes that assessed me with unsettling precision. He wore the dark leather of the Alpha's personal guard, a silver wolf emblem pinned at his shoulder. I was just... The words tangled on my tongue. What could I possibly say? That I had been imprisoned for months, and finally dared to seek answers. That I had just learned my entire existence was built on lies. Returning to your chambers, he finished for me, his tone carefully neutral. Good. Lady Miriam will be looking for you soon. Best not to give her cause for concern. It wasn't a threat, exactly. But the implication was clear. He was giving me a chance to disappear before consequences found me. I nodded mutely and turned toward the stairs, but his voice stopped me again. Your father was a good man, Celeste. Whatever else you may hear, remember that. I looked back at him, searching his face for mockery or cruelty, but found neither. Only a strange, sad certainty that made my chest ache with fresh grief. Then why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why did they? Because good men sometimes make impossible choices. He glanced down the corridor toward the council room, then back to me. And because the truth is rarely simple enough for easy judgment. Now go, before my kindness costs us both. I fled. The stairs blurred beneath my feet as I climbed, my lungs burning, my mind spinning with fragments of overheard conversation and cryptic warnings. When I finally reached my chamber and shut the door behind me, I slid down against the wood and let the sobs come, deep, wrenching sounds that felt like they might tear me apart from the inside. Father was gone, not by accident, but by execution, by order of the man who now controlled my fate. And I was trapped here, a prisoner in everything but name, surrounded by people who knew the truth and had chosen silence. The rain continued its endless percussion against the windows, and I understood with devastating clarity why they had kept me locked away. Not to protect me from grief, but to protect themselves from my questions, from my accusations, from whatever inconvenient truths might spill from a daughter who loved her father too much to accept easy lies. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, making myself as small as possible in that vast, empty room. My reflection caught in the darkened window glass, a pale, ghostly figure with tangled blonde hair and hollow eyes. I barely recognized myself, but beneath the grief, beneath the shock and betrayal, something else stirred. Something that tasted like anger, sharp and clarifying. They wanted me silent and compliant, locked away until I became nothing more than a convenient memory to be managed and controlled, but I was still my father's daughter. And if he had been good enough to die for his choices, then I could be strong enough to uncover why. The decision settled into my bones like iron, cold and unyielding. I would find the truth, whatever it cost me, whatever it revealed, even if the Alpha King himself stood in my way. Morning arrived with the same gray light that had become my constant companion. I woke on the floor where I had eventually collapsed, my body stiff and aching, my eyes swollen from crying. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind an eerie stillness that felt more oppressive than the storm. Lady Miriam arrived with my breakfast as she always did, precisely at dawn, carrying a tray laden with porridge, bread, and weak tea. But today, when she entered, her expression shifted from its usual practiced neutrality to something approaching alarm. "Celeste, what are you doing on the floor?" She set the tray down with a clatter and rushed toward me, her skirts sweeping across the stone. "Are you ill? Did you fall?" I let her help me up, my limbs protesting the movement. "I couldn't sleep," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I had nightmares." Her face softened marginally, though suspicion still lingered in her eyes. "About your father?" The question felt like a test. I nodded, watching her carefully. "I keep wondering about his last moments, whether he suffered, whether he knew." I let my voice break, let real tears gather. "Whether he knew how much I loved him." Lady Miriam's mouth tightened. She guided me to the chair by the small table and pressed me into it with efficient hands. "You mustn't dwell on such things. Your father is at peace now. That's all that matters." "But how did it happen?" I looked up at her, making my expression as innocent and desperate as possible. "No one will tell me the details." "Was he alone when the accident occurred? Did he call for me?" "Celeste, please." I grasped her hand, feeling her stiffen at the contact. "I need to know, just something. Anything that will help me understand." For a moment I thought she might relent. Her stern features wavered, something like sympathy flickering across her face. But then her jaw set, and she pulled her hand away. "Your father died quickly. He did not suffer. That is all you need to know." She straightened, smoothing her skirts with sharp, decisive movements. "Now eat your breakfast. You look dreadful. And I won't have the Alpha King think I've been neglecting my duties." The mention of Draven sent ice through my veins, but I forced myself to appear meek. Will I ever be allowed to see him? To thank him for his generosity in caring for me? Lady Miriam's laugh was bitter and short. "The Alpha King has no time for the concerns of—" She stopped herself, but not before I caught the implication. "The concerns of traders' daughters. He has important matters to attend to. You would do well to remain grateful for his mercy, and stop asking questions that have no good answers." She left before I could respond, the door clicking shut with familiar finality. I heard the lock turn, that small metallic sound that had become the rhythm of my days, but something had changed. Lady Miriam was rattled. My questions had unsettled her, which meant there were cracks in their carefully constructed lies, and cracks could be widened. I forced myself to eat, though the porridge tasted like ash. I needed strength for what came next. Because if I was going to uncover the truth, I couldn't do it cowering in this room. I needed to be strategic, patient, careful. I needed to become someone they would underestimate. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. I stopped fighting my confinement overtly. I ate what they brought me. I sat quietly during Lady Miriam's visits, asking no more questions about Father's death. I even requested a brush for my hair and set about making myself presentable again, braiding the pale blonde strands into a simple plait that hung over my shoulder. "Much better," Lady Miriam said approvingly when she saw the change. "You're beginning to look like a proper young woman again rather than some wild creature." I smiled demurely and thanked her for her guidance. But at night, when the castle slept, I explored. The lock on my door was old, the mechanism simple. Father had taught me basic smithing when I was young. Not proper metalwork, but enough to understand how things fit together. How pressure applied in the right place could shift components. A hairpin, carefully bent and manipulated, was enough to coax the lock open after several nights of practice. The first time I managed it, my hands shook so badly I nearly couldn't turn the mechanism back to relock it from the outside. But I did. And then I stood in that forbidden hallway, my heart pounding so loudly, I was certain every guard in the castle could hear it. I didn't go far that first night, just to the end of the corridor and back, mapping the patrol routes of the guards, noting which boards creaked and which stayed silent beneath careful feet. The auburn-haired guard I'd encountered before was nowhere to be seen, but others passed at regular intervals, predictable, which was useful. The second night, I made it to the library. It was a vast room, shelves stretching 2 stories high and packed with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and old paper and secrets. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating reading tables and comfortable chairs arranged near a massive fireplace. I ran my fingers along the spines of books, reading titles in the dim light, histories of the northern pacts, treaties and accords, the laws of succession. And there, on a lower shelf tucked away in the corner, trials and executions, a record of pack justice. My breath caught. I pulled the volume free carefully, wincing at the soft sound of leather sliding against wood. The book was heavy, bound in dark brown leather with gold lettering worn nearly smooth by time. I carried it to a table near the window where the moonlight was strongest, and opened it with trembling hands. The entries were chronological, dating back over a century. Each one detailed the crime, the trial, the sentence, the execution method. Reading them was like walking through a gallery of horrors, wolves who had murdered their packmates, who had conspired with enemies, who had broken sacred laws. The descriptions were clinical, factual, devoid of emotion. I turned pages carefully, searching for recent entries. My fingers left no trace on the thick paper, but my heart left bruises with every revelation. And then I found it. Matthias Thorne, Beta of Shadowmere Pack, executed by royal decree on the 15th day of the frost moon. Crime: conspiracy to assassinate Alpha King Draven Ashford and usurp the throne. Evidence presented by council member Jerome Blackthorne included intercepted correspondence detailing the plot, witness testimony from... The rest of the page had been torn out. I stared at the ragged edge where someone had ripped away the remainder of the entry, my mind reeling. Conspiracy to assassinate the Alpha King. My father had been accused of trying to kill Draven. No. It was impossible. Father had been loyal, devoted to the pack and its leadership. He had spoken of Draven with respect, had served him faithfully for years. There had to be a mistake or a lie, or interesting reading material for someone who should be sleeping. I spun so fast the book nearly tumbled from the table. A figure stood in the doorway, not a guard, but someone else entirely. He stepped into the moonlight, and I recognized him immediately, despite having seen him only once before. Alpha King Draven Ashford. He was exactly as I remembered, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore simple clothing, a dark shirt and trousers rather than royal regalia, but power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Everything about him spoke of danger, of control held just barely in check. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He crossed the library with measured steps, his gaze never leaving mine. When he reached the table, he glanced down at the open book, his expression unreadable. "So," he said quietly, "you've learned the official version of events." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Is it true?" "That depends on what you mean by true." He closed the book gently, his long fingers lingering on the cover. The trial happened. The evidence was presented. The sentence was carried out. All of that is documented fact. But did he do it? The question burst from me with more force than I intended. Did my father actually try to kill you? Draven's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in those dark depths, something that looked almost like regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Your father was found guilty by a council of his peers. The evidence was conclusive. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. He moved away from the table, pacing to the window where he stood silhouetted against the night sky. You should not be here, Celeste. You should be in your room, safe and ignorant. Safe? The word tasted like poison. You call imprisonment safety? Compared to the alternatives, yes. He turned back to face me, and the moonlight carved shadows across his features that made him look both younger and infinitely more dangerous. There are those who believe you were complicit in your father's plot, who think the beta's daughter must have known, must have helped. I have kept you confined to protect you from their judgment, or to protect yourself from my questions. His laugh was low and humorless. You are far more perceptive than I gave you credit for, and far more foolish. Do you have any idea what would happen if someone other than me had found you here, reading that book? I would finally get some answers. You would disappear. The words were flat, final. Accidents happen in castles this old. Falls from towers. Sudden illnesses. Tragic, unavoidable losses that everyone mourns publicly while forgetting privately. The threat should have terrified me. Perhaps it did. But anger burned hotter than fear. Then do it, I said, lifting my chin. Execute me like you executed my father. At least then I'll know the truth when I stand before the moon goddess for judgment. Something changed in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to hold his gaze even though every instinct screamed to look away, to submit, to show the deference an alpha king commanded. You have your father's courage, he said finally, and his stubbornness, both of which will get you killed if you're not careful. I'm already dead, I replied. I've been dead since you locked me away. The only question is whether I'll go quietly. Draven closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He was close enough now that I could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the scent of pine and night air that clung to him, close enough that I should have been terrified. Go back to your room, Celeste Thorne, he said, his voice dropping to something that was almost gentle. Go back, lock your door, and stop searching for truths that will only bring you pain. Your father is gone. Nothing you discover will change that. But it might change how I remember him. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. It might help me understand why, and that's worth any pain. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something like admiration flash across his face, but then his expression hardened again, the Alpha King reasserting control. Then understand this, he said coldly. Your father conspired against me. He paid the price for treason. And you? He paused, his jaw tightening. You are alive only because I have permitted it. Remember that before you continue down this path. He turned and strode from the library without another word, leaving me standing alone in the moonlight with my heart hammering and my mind racing. I waited until his footsteps faded completely before I moved. Then I returned the book to its shelf, made my way back through the silent corridors, and relocked my door from the inside. But as I lay in bed, watching dawn creep across the ceiling, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Draven Ashford was hiding something that went deeper than simple treason, and I was going to discover what it was. 3 weeks passed before I saw Draven again. In that time, I became a model prisoner. I attended Lady Miriam's daily visits with perfect compliance, accepting her lectures on propriety and patience without complaint. I ate every meal, kept my room tidy, and spent my days sitting by the window with embroidery I had no intention of completing. To anyone watching, I had finally accepted my fate, but the nights belonged to me. I had mapped nearly every accessible corridor in the castle, learning which servants were sympathetic, and which would report my presence immediately, which guards took their duties seriously, and which could be distracted or avoided. The auburn-haired guard, whose name I'd learned was Captain Finn Cordova, had caught me twice more, but had simply directed me back to my chambers with warnings that grew less stern each time. You remind me of someone, he'd said the last time, his expression thoughtful. Someone who also refused to accept easy answers. I wanted to ask who, but he'd already turned away, resuming his patrol as though our conversation had never happened. The library became my sanctuary. I couldn't risk taking the trial records again. Draven's warning had been clear enough. But there were other sources of information: letters, journals, historical accounts of the Pack's leadership. I read everything I could find about my father's service, about Draven's ascension to the throne, about the political tensions that had simmered beneath Shadowmere's surface for generations. What I discovered was a pattern. In the 2 years before Father's execution, 3 other high-ranking wolves had been found guilty of treason. All had been close to the previous Alpha King, Draven's father. All had been executed quietly, their families stripped of status and holdings. The official records painted them as conspirators and criminals, but the personal journals I found, hidden away in forgotten corners of the library, told a different story. They had been reformers, wolves who had questioned the old ways, who had advocated for change in how the Pack was governed. And one by one, they had been eliminated. Father's name appeared in several of those journals, always spoken of with respect and admiration. Matthias understands what's at stake, one entry read. He sees the cracks in the foundation as clearly as we do. If anyone can convince the young Alpha to listen, it's him. The young Alpha, Draven. I sat back in my chair, the journal trembling in my hands. What if Father hadn't been trying to assassinate Draven? What if he'd been trying to help him, to guide him toward necessary changes? What if someone else had twisted that into treason? The evidence was presented by council member Jerome Blackthorne. I had seen that name multiple times in my research. Jerome was from an old bloodline, one of the most conservative voices in Draven's council. He had opposed every reform the previous Alpha had attempted, had fought against any modernization of Pack law, and he had been the one to bring charges against Father. My heart raced as the pieces began assembling themselves into a terrible picture. But I needed more. I needed proof, or at least enough evidence to confront Draven with questions he couldn't simply dismiss. The council chambers would have records. Minutes from meetings, transcripts from the trial, everything I needed to understand what had really happened. But the council chambers were in the heart of the castle, constantly guarded and monitored. Getting inside would be nearly impossible, unless I had help. "You're planning something foolish," Captain Finn said the next night when I encountered him near the eastern wing. He didn't phrase it as a question. I considered denying it, but something in his expression told me he would see through any lie. "I need to know the truth about my father." "The truth won't bring him back." "No," I agreed, "but it might help me understand who to blame for his death." Finn's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like the beginning of a very dangerous path, Miss Thorne." "Celeste," I corrected. "And I'm already on a dangerous path. I have been since the moment they locked me away." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You said I reminded you of someone. Someone who refused to accept easy answers. Who was it?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't respond. Then, "Your father. I served under him before I was transferred to the king's personal guard. He was a good man and a brilliant strategist. He taught me that the hardest choices are often the most necessary ones." "Then help me," I pleaded. "Help me find out what choice he made that got him killed." "I can't. You can give me 5 minutes. That's all I need. 5 minutes in the council archives, and I'll never ask anything of you again." Finn studied my face, and I could see the internal war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed. "Tomorrow night. 3rd bell after midnight. There's a shift change in the guard rotation. You'll have exactly 5 minutes before the new guards arrive. If you're caught..." "You never saw me," I finished. "I understand." He nodded curtly and walked away, leaving me alone in the shadowed corridor, with my heart pounding and my hands shaking from a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The next night arrived with agonizing slowness. I pretended to sleep when Lady Miriam made her final check of the evening, then waited in the darkness, counting my heartbeats until I heard the distant bell toll midnight. 1 hour. Then another. Then the 3rd bell, its deep note resonating through the stone walls. I slipped from my room with practiced silence, navigating the now familiar corridors toward the council wing. Finn stood near the entrance to the archives, his posture rigid and formal. When he saw me, he gave the smallest nod and stepped aside. The door was unlocked. I slipped through and heard it close softly behind me. The archives were smaller than the library, but more densely packed. Shelves crammed with documents, ledgers, and bound records that smelled of ink and old parchment. I had no time to be systematic. I went straight for the section marked with recent dates, scanning labels until I found what I needed. Trial records, current reign. My hands shook as I pulled the folder free. Inside were transcripts, exactly as I'd hoped. I flipped through pages rapidly, my eyes catching fragments of testimony and cross-examination. And there, Father's trial. The charges were laid out in formal language: conspiracy to commit regicide, recruitment of co-conspirators, possession of seditious materials. The evidence included letters allegedly written by Father to other suspected traitors, outlining plans to overthrow Draven and establish a new ruling council, but something was wrong. The letters were described, but not included, entered into evidence and sealed by order of the Alpha King. The note read, "Too dangerous for general access." How convenient. Evidence no one could examine or verify. I kept reading, my anger building with each page. The witnesses were all council members loyal to Jerome Blackthorne. Not a single wolf who had actually served with Father had been called to testify on his behalf. The trial had lasted less than 3 hours from opening statement to sentence. 3 hours to condemn a man who had served the pack faithfully for decades. Find anything interesting? I spun around so violently I nearly dropped the folder. Draven stood in the doorway, backlit by the torches in the corridor. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. "I gave you a warning, Celeste. I told you to stop searching." My fear transformed instantly into fury. "You call that a trial? 3 hours? No defense witnesses? Evidence that no one was allowed to see? You have no idea what you're reading. I know a sham when I see one." I threw the folder onto the table between us, pages scattering. My father was condemned by a council of his enemies based on evidence no one could verify. That's not justice. That's execution. Draven's expression darkened. "Choose your next words very carefully." "Or what? You'll execute me too?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter and wild. "Go ahead. At least then I'll be with someone who actually loved me instead of trapped here with liars and murderers." He moved so fast I didn't have time to react. One moment he was across the room. The next he was right in front of me, his hand gripping my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to prevent escape. "You think I wanted this?" His voice was low and dangerous. "You think I enjoyed ordering the execution of a man who helped raise me, who taught me strategy and honor?" The confession hit me like a physical blow. Then why? Because I had no choice. The words exploded from him with a force that made me flinch. Because if I hadn't acted, the entire pack would have descended into civil war. Because sometimes being a king means making decisions that destroy you from the inside out. He released my arm and turned away, one hand rising to press against his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Your father came to me 6 months before his death. He told me there were wolves in my council plotting against me, not to kill me, but to control me. To manipulate me into policies that would benefit their bloodlines at the expense of the pack's well-being. He had proof, or so he claimed. Names, dates, plans." I stood frozen, barely breathing. I asked him for the evidence. He said he needed more time, that he was still gathering information. He made me promise not to act until he was certain. Draven's laugh was hollow, so I waited. And while I waited, Jerome Blackthorne came to me with evidence that Matthias was conspiring with foreign packs to assassinate me. Letters bearing your father's seal. Testimony from wolves I trusted. Fabricated, I whispered. It had to be fabricated, probably. He turned back to face me, and for the first time I saw past the Alpha King to the man beneath. Haunted, exhausted, carrying a burden that had bent him nearly to breaking. But I couldn't prove it. The evidence against Matthias was public. The council demanded justice. If I had refused, if I had appeared weak or compromised, Jerome and his allies would have used it to undermine every decision I made. The pack would have fractured. "So you sacrificed my father to maintain your power. I sacrificed your father to prevent a war that would have killed hundreds." His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine anguish there. "Do you think that makes me feel any better?" Do you think I don't see his face every time I close my eyes? We stood in the dim archive room, the scattered pages of the trial transcript between us like the remains of broken trust. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to call him a coward and a murderer. But another part, the part that had spent months studying politics and power, understood the terrible calculus he'd been forced to make. "There's more," Draven said quietly. "Something I haven't told anyone. Something your father made me swear to keep secret." He hesitated, and I could see him weighing the decision to continue. He knew Jerome was going to move against him. In our last private conversation, he told me that if anything happened to him, I was to protect you at all costs. He said you were the key to everything, though he died before he could explain what that meant. My breath caught. What? That's why I locked you away, Celeste. Not to punish you, or hide you from uncomfortable questions. He stepped closer, his intensity making the small room feel even smaller, but to keep you alive while I figured out what Jerome and his faction are really planning. Because your father believed you were important enough to die protecting, and I intend to honor that, even if you hate me for it. The world seemed to tilt sideways. All my assumptions, all my righteous anger, they hadn't been wrong exactly, but they had been incomplete. Father hadn't been a simple victim. He had been playing a longer game, one that somehow involved me in ways I didn't yet understand. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "Why would I be important? I'm nobody. Just a Beta's daughter with no rank, no power, no—" "Your mother," Draven interrupted. "Tell me what you know about your mother." The change of subject disoriented me. She died when I was born. Father never talked about her much. It hurt him too deeply. Did he ever tell you her bloodline? Her pack of origin? I shook my head slowly. He just said she was the most remarkable woman he'd ever known, that she had a gift for seeing the truth beneath surface lies. Draven's expression shifted into something almost like revelation. Your mother was Elena Nightshade, the last living descendant of the Oracle bloodline. The words meant nothing to me, but the way he said them, with reverence and fear mixed together, made my skin prickle. "I don't know what that means." "It means," Draven said carefully, "that you carry a gift that hasn't appeared in our pack for 3 generations. A gift that Jerome Blackthorne and his allies would kill to possess or destroy, because it threatens everything they've built their power upon." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather journal, its cover worn smooth by handling. "This belonged to your father. He left it with me before he died, with instructions to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now." I took the journal with trembling hands, recognizing Father's handwriting on the first page. "To my beloved Celeste, if you are reading this, then I have failed to protect you as I promised. But perhaps, in failing, I have given you the freedom to become what you were always meant to be. The truth lies not in what they tell you, but in what you can see for yourself. Trust your eyes, trust your heart, and above all, trust the blood that runs in your veins. You are more than you know. Your father." I looked up at Draven, questions multiplying faster than I could voice them. "What gift?" I demanded. "What am I supposed to see?" "That," he said, his expression unreadable, "is something you'll have to discover for yourself. But know this, Jerome knows what you are, or at least suspects. That's why your father had to die. And that's why, whether you believe me or not, I'm the only thing standing between you and the same fate." The journal became my obsession. I returned to my room that night with Father's words burning in my mind, Draven's revelation echoing in every heartbeat. Oracle bloodline, a gift that hadn't appeared in 3 generations. Jerome Blackthorne's fear of what I might become. None of it made sense, yet all of it explained the inexplicable care with which I'd been hidden away. I read the journal by candlelight, deciphering Father's careful handwriting. Most entries were mundane, observations about council meetings, notes on pack politics, reminders about supply shipments, but interspersed throughout were passages that seemed to speak directly to me, written as though he'd known I would one day read them in his absence. Elena could see through deception the way others see through glass. When someone lied to her, their words would shimmer with a strange light visible only to her eyes. I watched her unmask 3 conspirators in a single council session, before they even realized she possessed this ability. It terrified those who traded in falsehoods. It made her invaluable to those who valued truth. I pressed my fingers against the page, trying to imagine my mother, this woman I'd never known, who had apparently possessed abilities that defied normal understanding. Had she passed this gift to me? Was that what Father had meant? But I had never seen words shimmer or glow. I had never possessed any ability beyond the ordinary. If this oracle blood ran in my veins, it remained frustratingly dormant. Celeste shows signs of her mother's perceptiveness, though the full gift has not yet manifested. Elena's abilities didn't fully emerge until her 21st year, triggered by a moment of extreme emotional distress. I pray Celeste never faces such a trial, even as I fear it may be inevitable. My 21st birthday had been 3 months ago, spent alone in my chamber with only Lady Miriam's perfunctory well-wishes to mark the occasion. No moment of extreme distress beyond the constant ache of grief and isolation, or perhaps that wasn't quite true. I thought back to my confrontation with Draven in the library. The way his words had seemed to carry weight beyond their literal meaning. I had felt something then, a certainty about his sincerity that went beyond normal intuition. And in the archives, when he'd told me about Father's final conversation, I had known he was telling the truth, despite having no logical reason to believe him. Was that the gift beginning to wake? Or simply my desperate mind grasping for meaning? The days that followed brought unexpected changes. Lady Miriam arrived one morning with news that made my carefully maintained composure nearly crack. "The Alpha King has decided you may have limited freedom within the castle grounds," she announced, her tone suggesting she thoroughly disagreed with this decision. "You will be permitted to walk the gardens each afternoon, accompanied by guards. You will also be allowed to take meals in the small dining hall rather than your chambers. Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Lady Miriam's expression soured. "I'm sure I don't know His Majesty's reasoning. I only follow orders." She sniffed disapprovingly. "Though I suspect he's grown tired of your nocturnal wanderings, so Draven knew about my midnight explorations, and had decided that giving me supervised freedom was preferable to having me sneak around unsupervised. It was a strategic concession, one that acknowledged I wouldn't simply stay locked away anymore. That afternoon, I walked in the gardens for the first time in 7 months. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. 2 guards flanked me at a respectful distance, not prison escorts but protective presences. The gardens themselves were beautiful in their decay, roses surrendering their petals to the wind while evergreens stood sentinel along stone pathways. I was so focused on the simple joy of being outside that I didn't notice the other person in the garden until I nearly walked into him. "I apologize," I said automatically, stepping back. Then I looked up and felt my words die in my throat. The man before me was older, perhaps in his 6th decade, with silver hair and sharp features that might have been handsome in youth, but had hardened into something calculating with age. He wore the formal robes of a council member, deep burgundy with gold trim, and regarded me with eyes that held all the warmth of winter frost. "No apology necessary," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, "though I must say, I didn't expect to encounter the beta's daughter enjoying the gardens. I was told you preferred the solitude of your chambers. Every instinct I possessed screamed danger. This had to be Jerome Blackthorne." "I've been granted certain liberties," I replied carefully, keeping my voice neutral and my gaze respectfully lowered. Playing the meek, broken girl seemed wisest. "How fortunate for you." He stepped closer, and I had to force myself not to retreat. "I knew your father, you know. We served together on the council for many years." "Did you?" I kept my tone carefully empty of accusation. "Indeed. A brilliant strategist, though ultimately his ambitions exceeded his wisdom." Jerome's eyes studied me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I trust you don't share his unfortunate tendencies toward overreaching." "I have no ambitions beyond honoring my father's memory, council member." "Jerome, please. We need not stand on formality." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And what better way to honor Matthias than to accept the truth of his crimes and move forward in humble service to our pack?" There, a shimmer in the air around his words. like heat rising from sun-warmed stone. So subtle I might have imagined it, except that something deep in my chest resonated with certainty. He was lying. The gift. It was real, and it was waking. I nearly gasped, but caught myself, transforming the sound into a soft cough. Forgive me. The cold air. Of course, you've been inside far too long. Jerome's expression remained pleasantly neutral, but I caught something predatory in his gaze. I hope we'll have opportunities to speak again, Celeste. It would be a shame for Matthias's daughter to remain isolated from those who might guide her toward a more appropriate understanding of recent events. He departed with a formal bow, leaving me standing alone on the garden path with my heart racing and my mind reeling. The guards returned to my sides, and I allowed them to escort me back inside. But my thoughts were elsewhere. Jerome had approached me deliberately, testing me, trying to determine what I knew and how much of a threat I posed. His words about father's crimes had shimmered with deception, not the whole truth at least, if not an outright lie. I needed to tell Draven, needed to understand what this gift meant, and how to use it. But that evening, when I was escorted to the small dining hall for my meal, I found it empty except for one occupant. Draven sat at the head of a modest table, dressed simply in dark clothing that somehow made him seem more intimidating than royal regalia ever could. He gestured to the chair beside him. "I thought we should talk," he said. Privately. I sat, acutely aware of how close he was, how the candlelight caught in his dark hair and cast shadows across his angular features. A servant appeared with plates of roasted meat, vegetables, and fresh bread, before disappearing as silently as they'd come. "Jerome approached you in the garden," Draven stated. It wasn't a question. "Your guards are very thorough in their reports. Their job is to keep you alive, not to spy on you. There's a difference." He poured wine into both our glasses with steady hands. What did he say? I recounted the conversation carefully, watching Draven's expression darken with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He's moving faster than I anticipated," Draven said finally. "Testing whether you know anything, whether you pose a threat. The fact that he approached you personally means he's worried." "About what?" "I'm nobody. A prisoner with a suspicious bloodline and no idea what I'm supposed to do with it. You're the daughter of the man who nearly exposed his entire conspiracy. You carry blood that could unmask every lie he's built his power upon." Draven's eyes met mine, intense and focused. "You're far more dangerous than you realize, Celeste, especially if the oracle gift is beginning to manifest." I set down my fork carefully. When he spoke about my father's crimes, I saw something, a shimmer around his words, like they weren't quite solid, and I knew, not suspected, but knew that he was lying. Draven leaned forward, his full attention locked on me. "What else? Any other manifestations? When you told me about your conversation with father, I felt the truth of it, a certainty that had no logical basis." I met his gaze, and right now, sitting here with you, I can feel... I trailed off, unsure how to articulate the sensation. "Feel what?" "Conflict. You're torn between what you want to do and what you think you must do. There's anger there, and grief, and..." I stopped, suddenly uncertain whether I should continue. "And?" His voice had dropped lower, almost rough. "Loneliness," I whispered. "You're so terribly lonely it's like a physical ache." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Draven looked away, his jaw tight. "Your mother could do more than see lies," he said quietly. "She could read the emotional truths beneath people's words, feel what they truly felt. It made her an extraordinary judge of character, and an even more extraordinary threat to those who preferred to keep their intentions hidden." "Is that why they killed her?" The question came unbidden. Draven's head snapped toward me. "What?" "Father's journal said she died when I was born, but he never explained how, just that it was the greatest loss of his life." The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind with terrible clarity. But if she possessed abilities that threatened people like Jerome, if she could unmask conspiracies with a glance... "She died in childbirth," Draven said firmly. "There was no conspiracy, no..." He stopped, his expression shifting as though he'd just heard his own words and recognized their certainty as false. At least, that's what I was told. I was only 14 when it happened, too young to question the official account. The shimmer again, subtle but present. Not a lie, exactly, but truth obscured by incomplete knowledge and assumptions never examined. Someone should question it now, I said quietly. Draven was silent, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that spoke of racing thoughts. Finally, he stood and extended his hand toward me. Come with me. There's something you need to see. I took his hand. Warm and calloused, the hand of a warrior rather than a pampered ruler, and let him lead me from the dining hall. We walked through corridors I hadn't yet explored, descending stairs that spiraled deep beneath the castle's main structure. The air grew colder, damper, until we reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. Draven produced a key and unlocked it, gesturing for me to enter. The room beyond was small and windowless, lit by enchanted crystals that glowed with steady blue light. Shelves lined every wall, packed with documents, artifacts, and objects I couldn't immediately identify. But what drew my eye was the portrait hanging on the far wall. A woman looked out from the canvas, her expression serene and knowing. She had pale blonde hair like mine, eyes of startling green, and a smile that suggested she knew secrets the painter would never capture. Your mother, Draven said softly. This was her private study. Your father sealed it after her death, and I've kept it locked ever since. No one else knows it exists. I moved toward the portrait as if pulled by invisible threads, unable to look away from the face that was somehow familiar despite having never seen it before. Tears burned in my eyes. She's beautiful, I whispered. She was extraordinary. Draven stood beside me, also studying the portrait. She helped my father navigate some of the most difficult years of his reign. When she died, it was like the pack lost its moral compass. Things began to fracture in ways we're still dealing with. I turned away from the portrait and began examining the shelves. Books on ancient bloodlines, journals filled with observations about council members, correspondence that referenced the gift and the site, without fully explaining either. And there, in a locked glass case, a final letter addressed in familiar handwriting. To my daughter, should she inherit what I carried. My hands shook as Draven unlocked the case and handed me the letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but Mother's words were clear. My dearest Celeste, if you are reading this, then the gift has found you as it found me. Do not be afraid of what you can see and feel. It is not a curse, but a responsibility, the ability to witness truth in a world that often prefers comfortable lies. Your father will protect you as long as he can, but the day may come when you must protect yourself. Trust in the blood of your mothers before you. Trust in the love that created you. And know that seeing the truth is only the first step, having the courage to act upon it. That is where true power lies. Be brave, my daughter. Be true. And never let them make you believe that your gift is something to be hidden or ashamed of. Your loving mother, Elena. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face before I could speak. Jerome knows, I said, my voice rough with emotion. He knows what I might become, what threat I pose to his carefully constructed lies. That's why he killed Father. That's why he approached me today, to assess whether the gift has manifested, whether I'm dangerous yet. Yes, Draven confirmed. And now we need to decide what to do about it. I looked up at him. This alpha king who had been forced to execute the man who'd been like a father to him, who carried the weight of impossible choices and ruled a pack riddled with conspiracy. And I felt the truth of him, the genuine desire to protect me, the crushing responsibility he bore, the fear that he would fail again as he'd failed my father. We expose him, I said. We use this gift to unmask every lie he's told, every conspiracy he's woven. We finish what my father started. That's incredibly dangerous, I know. I folded Mother's letter carefully and held it against my chest. But I'm my mother's daughter, and my father's legacy. Dangerous is apparently what I was born for. For the first time since I'd met him, Draven smiled. A real smile, small but genuine, that transformed his entire face. Then we'd better make sure you survive long enough to see it through, he said. Because Jerome Blackthorn doesn't forgive threats, and you, Celeste Thorne, have just become the greatest threat he's ever faced. The next 2 weeks transformed everything. Draven moved me from my tower prison to chambers in the royal wing, a statement that raised eyebrows throughout the castle, but effectively placed me under his direct protection. Lady Miriam was dismissed from her duties with a generous pension and stern warnings about discretion. Captain Finn became my personal guard, a role he accepted with grim determination and what I suspected was genuine relief. "Your father would have wanted someone he trusted watching over you," Finn said simply when I thanked him. "I failed him once. I won't fail you." But the real work happened in Mother's sealed study, where Draven and I spent long hours piecing together the conspiracy that had cost my father his life. The gift grew stronger with each passing day. I could now sense deception not just in words, but in written documents, in the very air around objects that had been used to perpetrate lies. Mother's journals became my textbook, teaching me to hone and direct this ability rather than be overwhelmed by it. "The key," one entry explained, "is not just to see the lie, but to understand the truth it's hiding. Every deception is a reaction to something real. Find the shape of what's being concealed, and you'll find your answer." We discovered that Jerome hadn't acted alone. 3 other council members were complicit in the conspiracy, wolves from old bloodlines who had systematically eliminated anyone who threatened their control over pack policy. They had fabricated evidence, manipulated trials, and orchestrated executions, all while maintaining a facade of loyalty to the crown. My father had uncovered most of this before his death. What he hadn't realized was how deeply the corruption ran. How many witnesses had been compromised or intimidated into silence. He had trusted in the system to deliver justice once he presented his evidence. That trust had killed him. "We can't make the same mistake," Draven said one evening, as we reviewed documents spread across Mother's desk. "If we bring this before the full council, Jerome will have time to prepare his defenses, to spin new lies. We need irrefutable proof that even his allies can't ignore. The original letters," I said suddenly. "The ones Jerome claimed father wrote, planning your assassination. They're sealed, supposedly too dangerous for public access. But if I could examine them with the gift, they're kept in Jerome's private vault, heavily guarded, magically warded." Draven's expression was thoughtful. "Though there is one night each year when the wards are lowered for maintenance. The winter solstice, 3 days from now. Then that's when we act." What followed was a period of careful planning that felt like preparing for war. Draven quietly moved loyal guards into key positions. Finn recruited wolves he trusted, soldiers who had served under my father and remembered his honor. We couldn't tell them everything, not yet, but we prepared them for the possibility of conflict within the castle itself. I spent hours practicing with the gift, learning to push past surface deceptions to deeper truths. Mother's journals spoke of oracle-blooded women who could compel truth from liars, who could make deception physically painful for those who attempted it in their presence. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel the potential growing, like a muscle strengthening with use. On the second night before the solstice, Jerome requested a private audience with the Alpha King. "He's getting nervous," Draven said, after denying the request. "He can sense something shifting but can't quite identify the threat." "Good," I replied, surprised by my own cold satisfaction. Let him worry. Let him make mistakes. But Jerome's next move wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated strike. The summons came at dawn on the day before the solstice. The full council demanded Draven's presence to discuss matters of urgent pack security. It was phrased as a request, but everyone understood the implication. Refuse, and he would appear weak or tyrannical. "It's a trap," Finn said flatly when we gathered in Draven's private chambers. "They're going to force a confrontation before you're ready. Then we spring our own trap first." I stood from where I'd been sitting, my decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I'll go to the council. I'll testify about what we've discovered." "Absolutely not," Draven said immediately. "They'll tear you apart. You're not ready. I'm the only one who can prove the truth." I met his eyes, willing him to understand. The gift isn't just about seeing lies, Draven. It's about making others see them too. If I stand before the council and reveal what Jerome has done, if I can make the truth visible to everyone present, You'll be painting a target on yourself that no amount of royal protection can erase. The target's already there. It has been since the day I was born. I moved closer to him, needing him to hear not just my words, but the certainty behind them. My father died trying to expose this conspiracy. My mother's gift was feared because it threatened those who dealt in deception. I can't hide from what I am anymore, and neither can they. The argument that followed was intense, with Finn supporting Draven's concerns, while I insisted on the necessity of confrontation. But ultimately, Draven recognized what I had already accepted. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the culmination of choices made by my parents, by Draven himself, by Jerome and his conspirators. Running from it would only delay the inevitable. The council chamber was a circular room with high ceilings and narrow windows that let in cold winter light. 12 seats arranged in a semicircle faced the Alpha's throne, currently occupied by wolves whose expressions ranged from curious to hostile. Jerome sat in the position of highest honor, his face composed in lines of false concern. I entered flanked by Finn and 2 other guards, my simple gray dress a stark contrast to the council members' formal robes. Every eye tracked my movement as I took my position in the center of the room. Council members, Draven began from his throne, his voice carrying absolute authority. I have called this session to address matters of treason that have plagued this pack for far too long. Celeste Thorne, daughter of the former Beta, will present evidence that demands your immediate attention. Jerome's eyebrow raised slightly. Evidence regarding what, exactly, my lord? We already conducted a thorough investigation into Matthias Thorne's crimes. Lies. The word came from my mouth with surprising strength. I met Jerome's gaze directly and saw his expression flicker with surprise. Everything you told the Alpha King about my father was fabricated, and I can prove it. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Jerome's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the calculations racing behind his eyes. Bold accusations from a grieving daughter, he said smoothly. Understandable, perhaps, but hardly credible evidence. Then let's examine the evidence you provided. I pulled the documents Draven and I had prepared from a leather case. The letters you claimed were written by my father, plotting the Alpha King's death. May I see the originals? They're sealed for security. Bring them. Draven's command cut through Jerome's protest. Now. 2 guards departed and returned minutes later with a locked box. Jerome's face had gone pale, though he maintained his composure. The box was opened, the letters extracted and handed to me. The moment my fingers touched the parchment, the gift flared to life with unprecedented intensity. The letters seemed to writhe in my hands, every word surrounded by shimmering distortion that spoke of deception and manipulation. But more than that, I could feel the truth beneath the lies, could sense the actual events these fabrications had been designed to conceal. These letters weren't written by my father, I said, my voice carrying through the silent chamber. The handwriting is forged, the seal is a copy. Even the parchment is wrong. This type wasn't used in our pack's correspondence until 6 months after my father's death. I looked up at the council, and with an effort of will I didn't know I possessed, I pushed the gift outward. Every council member gasped as the letters in my hands began to glow with sickly light, visible to everyone present, the physical manifestation of the lies they contained. My mother was Elena Nightshade, I continued, my confidence growing as I watched their reactions, the last oracle blood of her line. She could see truth and deception as clearly as you see light and darkness. That gift has passed to me, and what I see when I look at Jerome Blackthorne is a conspiracy of lies built over decades. This is absurd. Jerome stood, his composure finally cracking. The girl is delusional, grasping at, "Sit down." Draven's voice was quiet but absolute. "Or I will have you removed from this chamber in chains. The choice is yours." Jerome sat, his face now visibly sweating. I continued, laying out everything we had discovered, the pattern of executions, the fabricated evidence, the systematic elimination of anyone who questioned the old guard's authority. With each revelation, I held up corresponding documents, and each time the gift made the deception visible to all present. The moderate council members looked horrified. Even Jerome's allies seemed shaken, realizing how deeply they'd been implicated in crimes they might not have fully understood. When I finished, the chamber was silent except for the crackling of torches. Council Member Blackthorne, Draven said, his voice cold with controlled fury. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Jerome's face had transformed from practiced neutrality to barely suppressed rage. She's a witch, an abomination. This gift she claims is dark magic that has no place. Careful, I interrupted quietly. Lying in my presence is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for you, isn't it? I can make it worse. I didn't know if I actually could, but the gift seemed to pulse in agreement, and Jerome flinched as though physically struck. The Oracle bloodline has served this pack for generations, Draven stated. It is recognized in our oldest laws as a sacred gift, not dark magic. Your attempt to paint it otherwise only proves Celeste's accusations. He stood, and every wolf in the chamber felt the weight of his authority. Jerome Blackthorne, I charge you with treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, fabrication of evidence, and the wrongful execution of Matthias Thorne. You will be tried before the full pack assembly, where the truth you've so carefully hidden will be laid bare for all to see. Guards moved forward to take Jerome into custody. For a moment, I thought he might fight, might try some desperate final gambit. But then his shoulders sagged in defeat, and he allowed himself to be led away. 3 other council members were arrested as well, their complicity undeniable once the evidence was examined with the gift's revelations. The remaining council members pledged their loyalty to Draven and their commitment to truth, though I suspected some would need watching in the months to come. When it was over, when the chamber had finally cleared, Draven approached me. You were magnificent, he said quietly. Your father would have been so proud. Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. I wish he could have seen it, wish he could have known his name would be cleared. He knew. Draven's hand found mine, warm and steady. He knew because he trusted you with the truth, even knowing he might not live to see justice done. That's the kind of faith that transcends death. Over the following weeks, the full extent of the conspiracy was revealed in public trials that the entire pack witnessed. Jerome and his allies were found guilty on all charges. Their executions were carried out with the same swift justice they had once wielded so cruelly against others. My father's name was cleared, his service honored, his sacrifice recognized. A monument was erected in the castle gardens, a stone wolf standing vigilant with both his name and my mother's carved beneath. I stood before it one winter morning, my breath misting in the cold air, and felt a peace I hadn't known in months. They would have liked this, Draven said, appearing beside me. He'd made a habit of finding me during these quiet moments, his presence becoming as natural as breathing. I think Mother would have preferred something less grand, I replied. She seemed to value truth over monuments. Then it's fortunate she has a daughter carrying on that tradition. He paused, then added quietly, The council wants to formalize your position. Oracle advisor to the crown, with a seat at every session. They're appropriately terrified of you now, I laughed despite myself. Good. Fear keeps people honest. It also makes them resentful. You'll need protection. Support. He turned to face me fully. I know I have no right to ask this, not after everything I failed to prevent, but I placed my fingers against his lips, silencing him. You saved my life, Draven. You honored my father's last request even when it would have been easier to eliminate the threat I represented. You gave me the tools to fight back and the freedom to become what I was meant to be. I lowered my hand, but held his gaze. Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is yes. His smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. I haven't asked yet. You were going to ask me to stay, to take my place at court, to use the gift in service of the pack. I felt the truth of it resonating between us. And I'm saying yes, this is where I belong now, where my parents wanted me to be. That's not all I was going to ask. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I was going to ask if you might consider staying not just as Oracle advisor, but as something more. Someone who stands beside the Alpha, not just in council chambers, but in all things. My breath caught. Draven, I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued. We've both been through too much, lost too much, to rush into anything. But I want you to know that when I look at you, I don't see the Beta's daughter, or even the oracle blood, remarkable as that gift is. His hand lifted to cup my face gently. I see someone brave enough to fight for truth, even when the world demanded comfortable lies. Someone who refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. Someone I would be honored to stand beside, if you'll have me. I leaned into his touch, feeling the truth of his words resonating through the gift and through my own heart. Ask me again in the spring, I whispered. When the world isn't quite so cold, when we've both had time to heal. Ask me then. I will, he promised. And then, with infinite gentleness, he kissed my forehead, a gesture that held more promise than any passionate declaration. We stood together in the winter garden, before the monument to my parents, and I felt their presence like a blessing. Father's courage had given me the strength to fight. Mother's gift had given me the tools to win. And Draven's faith had given me the freedom to become something neither prisoner nor victim, but a woman who could stand in the light and speak truth to power. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be those who resented my gift, who feared what I represented. There would be new conspiracies to uncover, new lies to expose, new battles to fight, but I would face them all with clear eyes and an unbroken spirit, honoring the legacy of those who had died so I could live, and building a future where truth was valued above comfort. I was Celeste Thorne, daughter of Matthias and Elena, oracle blood and survivor, and I was finally completely free.